The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Nation, the lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'd also like to acknowledge the history of discriminatory, racist, and colonial practices that have had a lasting legacy and continue to create barriers for Indigenous peoples in the healthcare system. Okay, now today I'm very happy to welcome Arleen Tyndall, my friend and colleague, back to the BCCFE. And for those, I think most of you know, but for those of you who don't know, Arleen is a clinical pharmacist who has worked in Vancouver, or who did work in Vancouver since 1997 at St. Paul's Hospital. And she has taken on varied clinical positions with the Center in HIV, at the Downtown Community Health Clinic. She worked at MAT, Oak Tree Clinic, and she spent many years as a MAT pharmacist, as I mentioned, providing frontline HIV adherence support to peoples in the Downtown Eastside. And her work, colleagues know, she has also taken many sabbaticals to travel, which includes backpacking in Southeast Asia for 6 months, outdoor leadership and kayak guide training on Vancouver Island for a year, trekking all over the world, specifically, I can mention India and Nepal for 2 months, a stint in Ottawa with her husband Mark for 4 years, and now Bali, where she's been for the past year. And all of these varied life experiences have culminated into realization that she's going to passionately share with us today. Now, before I turn the session over to Arleen, we mentioned about the questions. And for people who are online, we will be keeping track of any questions that you have. So if you have any, please just type your questions into the chat or the question panel, and they will be shared by a member of our education team, and we'll save questions till the end of the presentation. Okay? So please, Arleen.
Great. Thank you, Linda, for the introduction. And I'd like to thank everyone who's here, either in person or online, for showing up and choosing to be here with curiosity or just fear of missing out. You never know. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my journey with you all today. I got it. So this land acknowledgement, which Linda already spoke of, was sent to me as part of the CFP template slides. And it brought up some feelings in me when I read it as I sat in Bali. These words repeated over and over again in Vancouver also brought feelings of anger, powerlessness, frustration that felt like words weren't enough to repair all the historical and ongoing collective wounds. It then dawned on me that my own journey of self-discovery in Bali was unveiling a similar story of colonization and oppression, of stolen land and lives, and how this lasting legacy across the world rises to the surface and creates barriers that affect my own life in the present moment, no matter where I'm living. So today I will share this story. My intention today is to, as a peer with lived experience, is to bring awareness to our own intergenerational trauma cycles imposed upon us as children, and to share my experiences in learning how to break them. Whichever peer group that you feel I represent for you, it could be that I'm a health professional trying to engage patients in their own care. It could be that I'm a mother or a parent trying to do the right thing and raise a good kid. I'm a wife and a partner trying to keep a relationship healthy and loving. I'm also a child that had grown up in a very dysfunctional family, but I was trying to be as normal as I could. If all else fails to resonate with you, then just choose human. If any uncomfortable feelings or thoughts may arise for you during my presentation, just please make note of it, whether it be mentally or if you want to write it down, and be curious about what may lie beneath that. So trauma-informed care takes into account an understanding of trauma in all aspects of service delivery and places a priority on the individual's safety, choice, and control. From a clinical standpoint, I was the CFE mat pharmacist in 2000, working in the Downtown Eastside. At that point, my self-study was very work-focused. I signed up for as many work-related courses as I could on nonviolent communication, on cultural sensitivity, on conflict resolution, and of course, trauma-informed care. Of course, the goals of trauma-informed care were to improve patient engagement, medication adherence, health outcomes, provider and staff wellness. Of course, it also helps reduce healthcare costs. So this was an ongoing, continuing education. I like to believe that it was my trauma-informed care experience that helped me. In 2010, I had moved to Ottawa with Mark. I was working at a community pharmacy at the time, but I was held up at knife point in 2011. I found it ironic that over all those many years in working the Downtown East Side, I never once felt unsafe, even on outreach, in the alleys and SROs. It never occurred to me that I would ever be at risk. At this point, it was in a suburban pharmacy. A blonde girl with a baseball cap had walked in right when we opened the door that morning. She handed me a crumpled piece of paper, and scrawled on it in pencil was, "I have AIDS, and I will stab you with my knife that was dipped in my blood if you don't give me all your OxyContin." I was like, okay. I saw a guy in a purple t-shirt behind her pretending to look at cough medicine. I saw to the right an older Chinese woman who always came in every morning to check her blood pressure. And I looked up front, and the only other staff person was my front store manager, who had literally just opened the door, and he was only at the exit, the only exit. Well, I looked at her sheet or her note again and thought, well, this isn't the face of AIDS that I knew. I'd worked on 10C. I had seen the face of AIDS. So I knew this was an act of desperation. And I kind of laughed in disbelief to myself, thinking, wow, you chose the wrong pharmacist. Like, I took a lot of AE calls. Like, I did not think I was at risk of getting HIV from a knife dipped in blood. And then I thought, well, I don't know. She probably doesn't even have a very high viral load. Like, all these things were going through my head. And then I just yelled out, "Matt, you got to see this note. They want all our OxyContin." And he's like, "What?" And as soon as they saw that I wasn't actually reacting in fear and I wasn't giving it to them, they just ran off. They ended up actually robbing another pharmacy down the street with the same notes. So how did I stay in the present moment and that moment? I wasn't triggered. I wasn't reacting in fear. However, a year later, I had no idea how extremely difficult it would be to bring trauma-informed care home when I later learned that my brother had a cocaine addiction and was stealing money from my parents. And 5 years later, after that, I had a very strong-willed, fiercely independent child that brought me to my knees, literally, and awakened in me the need to bring trauma-informed care home for my son, my husband, and myself. I grew up thinking I never wanted to have children so that I didn't have to become a mother, because I didn't want to become my mother, who was physically and emotionally abusive. All my memories of my childhood were awful. My father worked very hard as an immigrant, providing for our family from Indonesia, and my mother stayed home with me, which was the root of all my stress. I finally decided at 35 that I had to create my own family, my own happy family. And in this movie in my head, I had a script of adventures and activities with expectations of how I wanted my life to look like. We created photo-worthy life moments. But what happens when the actors in your life movie don't follow the script? A man once asked Buddha, "I want happiness." Buddha said, "First remove I, that's ego. Then remove want, that's desire. See, now you're left with only happiness." I wanted happiness. I wanted the happy family I never had. This year in Bali, I have learned what it means to remove ego and desire. When Max was around 4, the more he could vocalize and assert himself, the more I struggled as a parent. If he couldn't give up his iPad or comply with my requests, the emotional triggers were overwhelming for me. This led to anxiety, to shame, to exhaustion, resentment, anger, burnout. I had vowed never to become my mother. I strove to do everything she wasn't, but to avoid her flaws meant that I had to be perfect in my mind. I wasn't the calm, nurturing mother I envisioned I would be. Whenever we had a power struggle that turned into confrontation and yelling, slamming doors, I would end up crying in shame on the bathroom floor. My counselor told me that I was time traveling. I was reliving my childhood wounds, looking at Max as if he were my mother. And when he started hitting me, I actually remember yelling at him, "You are just like my mother." He knew what that meant, and he responded by hitting me harder. Instinctively, I reverted to my childhood pattern of running to the bathroom, locking myself in there for safety. And there I would cry in shame until Max would guiltily come knocking on the door to rouse me to the present moment. My shame was now his. Something had to change. In 2017, when Max was 4, a girlfriend recommended that I look into conscious parenting. Conscious parenting is about connecting with yourself as a parent first. It's about increasing your own self-awareness. It's about avoiding placing expectations that result in an emotional canyon between us, the parent, and our own children. It's about focusing on allowing the natural inclinations of our children to emerge spontaneously. Consciousness is a lifelong journey and a moment-to-moment practice to connect with yourself and your children, or your partner, or your work colleagues, from a place of love, authenticity, and acceptance rather than fear, ego, and control. It eventually taught me to release the toxic patterns of perfectionism, shame, blame, and guilt. How were you raised by your parents? I knew I was being raised by traditional parenting paradigm. It was based on control and fear. It was based on rewards and punishment. It was based on past wounds and future catastrophizing. It's a hard word. About the future. It's based on a hierarchy where kids are lesser than, and they just listen to you because you're the parent and you said so. It's based in mainstream culture. Everyone's doing it, so it's got to be right. It's got to be normal. And it's based on the focus is on fixing the kid. Conscious parenting is a huge paradigm shift. Has anyone here heard of conscious parenting? 2 people. It is very out of the box. And usually when you start hearing about it, it's because you're either a counselor or you really need it. You really need it. So this huge paradigm shift is like a complete 180-degree concept that for many is hard to even imagine carrying it out. It's misperceived as permissive, but the conscious approach to behavior issues in children and even in ourselves as adults is to focus on 3 C's, creating clear, consistent, and compassionate boundaries so that discipline or punishment is unnecessary. So what is conscious parenting? It's based on connection. It's based on empowering, giving your children autonomy. It's based on natural consequences, not the made-up punishments that we arbitrarily make. It's based in the present moment. It's out of the box, and it's focused on fixing the parent's own unmet emotional needs. Kids are actually our equals and our greatest awakeners because they will mirror to you your own stuff. Not to swear. So conscious parenting, I view it as harm reduction. There is already damage done. I know I can't go travel back in time to undo what I've already done. But I dove into all these different webinars and online conferences and podcasts, just front loading my brain. I was trying to fix myself and be that better or perfect parent. It's very Hollywood, it's socially accepted and trendy in progressive modern parenting circles. And I added it to my toolkit to be that perfect parent, anything to prove that I wasn't my mother. I was going to be different and I was going to make my family happy. 6 years into this ongoing learning, I was still struggling. Nothing was changing. Like, how much more knowledge could I possibly put in my brain? It was shaming for me. I became more desperate because things got worse at home. In July 2020, when Mark was hospitalized after a horrific mountain biking accident in Whistler, he was at BGH for a month. I fell into a prolonged state of anxiety. With the stress of COVID, Mark's health unknown at the time, we ended up selling our house. We decided to move to Bali, but it was postponed. I sought help through another professional counselor. This anxiety seeped into every interaction and aspect of my life. Max was 7 years old at the time, in grade 2. He started saying, "I'm a bad kid. I hate myself. I want to kill myself." And then he started hitting us. Things got even worse. Where was this coming from? What was I doing wrong? I was in a constant state of shame as I continued to blame myself. Feeling so alone and isolated in these critical thoughts, The shame of being a horrible mother, the sadness and isolation was not a learning mindset to help growth. But I kept finding more solutions. I hired an art therapist to visit Max at home. I got a counselor for Max, me, and Mark. I was making calm boxes and putting them in all corners of the house. Like, it was endless, the solutions I was trying to find, these band-aid things, and I felt so hopeless. Mark, on the other hand, distracted himself, as a lot of people do, with work-related tasks, the news, or pop culture. And it really triggered me one day when I came down the stairs. I asked him, "What are you reading?" or what podcast are you listening to? He said, "Oh, the overdose crisis." I'm like, "Another overdose crisis podcast? Like, why another one?" I became so resentful. I thought he didn't care as much as I did. I thought I was ahead of him on this linear path towards conscious parenting because he was engaged in it like I was. But the reality was we had different coping mechanisms to the same stress in our house. There is no linear path to conscious parenting. It's just a journey, like a bowl of spaghetti, moment to moment, highs and lows, and is actually never ending. I was nowhere ahead of him, and he was nowhere behind me. So conscious parenting ideas, the courses, the podcasts, the books I bought, they showed me these ideas that kept me buoyant, like I had a tool that I could be more conscious or peaceful with, but it wasn't working. I didn't understand that consciousness requires a deep dive into the shadows of your mind, into the darkness where there are hidden secrets, stories, feelings that we never look at. The new parenting tools didn't lay out that something in me had to die to get to the conscious part. All the doing, the fixing, the planning, the learning was actually perpetuating the very root cause of my disconnect to myself and to my family. I finally realized that the ideas behind conscious parenting actually had nothing to do with being a parent and everything to do with being human. The understanding acceptance of our shared human condition, that we all see life through a lens of having experienced some form of trauma. So what is trauma? Trauma is what happens inside us after an event, a lasting rupture within the self as a result of a difficult or hurtful situation, an emotional wound of not being seen or known that is triggerable at any time. Unresolved trauma distorts our view of the world and keeps us stuck in the past, limiting who we can be. Capital T trauma, this is a list of adverse childhood experiences. It was a research conducted by the Center for Disease Control and is in no way exhaustive. It names physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, a family member who is depressed or diagnosed with another mental illness, a family member who is addicted to alcohol or another substance, a family member who is in prison, witnessing a mother being abused or losing a parent to separation, divorce, or death. Of course, in other developing countries, there might be being a refugee, war, oppression, racism, poverty, starvation, political violence, clearly traumatic experiences that aren't listed here. But what about all those people who believe they had happy childhoods with no trauma? Does this exist? Deepak Chopra, if you know him, he's a guru of consciousness and meditation. He himself had no memory of a traumatic event in his happy childhood. He noticed addictive patterns with alcohol and smoking to deal with stress as a medical resident. Is this trauma? So that's an example of small t trauma, unmet emotional needs. Children have essential psychological needs that we might not be giving them. So trauma isn't always about the bad thing happening to us. It could also be the after effect of a good thing not happening when it could have. Unconditional loving acceptance by multiple adults. The key word is unconditional. Rest, not having to work or put effort into making the relationship with their parents work. Freedom to experience emotions, negative, positive, to allow natural circuits to develop. And spontaneous, creative, free play in nature. In my own childhood, I know I didn't get the first three. And certainly in the 80s, they just let you run around the neighborhood and not care when you came home until you ate dinner. So at least I got 1 out of 4. But examples of small t trauma, which are these less memorable, insidious events, could be bullying by peers, casual but repeatedly harsh comments of well-meaning parents, being sent to your room and trying to express anger, a lack of sufficient emotional connection with a nurturing adult. But what is connection? The human need for connection is, do you see me? Do you hear me? And am I worthy? Am I valued? Do I belong? And am I worthy of your love? A psychologist, a doctor, and a lawyer, all advocates for extremely traumatized persons, asked me in a workshop one day, it feels disrespectful to compare my story, our own, to those who have suffered horrible crimes against humanity. How can we call what we have experienced trauma? Trauma is not the external event, so it can't be compared. Trauma is the emotional wound inside after the event that causes that rupture of self, where we disconnect from our own true spirit to cope with the pain of not being seen, heard, or valued. So this is the experience that we share as humans with our own patients in the Downtown Eastside, with our neighbor or whoever, a stranger who's yelling at someone or at you at work. And it doesn't matter what the event. So if a child who gets sent to their room when angry about an injustice doesn't feel seen, heard, or valued, would be the same as a person who is beaten by their partner who is not experiencing being seen, heard, or valued. What is intergenerational trauma? Passing on the traumatic effects of a historical event to the next generation. It exists across all cultures, ages, and socioeconomic groups. And 2 common unhealthy coping mechanisms: denial, refusing to acknowledge that trauma even happened, or minimization, ignoring the impact of the trauma and making the traumatic experience appear smaller than it really is. So what are these traumatic effects that I brought was brought up with? And what am I passing on to my son, Max? Fear, anxiety, avoidance, shame, unworthiness, emotional dysregulation, self-hatred could be some examples. We inherit pain, and when it's not coped with, it gets passed on again. Trauma exists on both sides of our family that Mark and I have minimized until now. We have opened up the conversations and broken the silence on how our stories affect us and what patterns that we learned to cope to get through them as a child. My attempts at breaking my trauma cycles is harm reduction. How was I raising Max differently? I was asked by a psychologist friend in Bali. Well, having never been told or made to feel loved as a child, I told her how I swung the pendulum to the other extreme. How I tell Max every night that I love him, no matter what happens, how angry we get, or we say regretful things, I still love you. I cuddle with him, I show him affection, I ask him if he feels loved. I told her and laughed, oh, I know, I've totally overcompensated. I'm overcompensating for the love that I never felt. She looked me in the eye and she said, no, that isn't overcompensating. You've broken the trauma cycle of knowing that you weren't loved. So now I'm connecting with my past in Bali. Last week, I was at my parents' gravestone, a cemetery. That's my mother and father. And I looked at their marker and I realized, wow, that's not even their real names. I've been learning about the history. There was an anti-Chinese, anti-communist purge that occurred in Bali and in Indonesia between 1965 and 1966, supported by the US and the UK, that led to a genocide of all the Indonesian Chinese by vigilante death squads and the Indonesian army. Over 1 million people were massacred in the streets, in the rice paddies. In 1966, President Suharto proclaimed a law of assimilation. Chinese Indonesians had to proclaim their loyalty to Indonesia by shedding all Chinese identity. So these are their Indonesian chosen names. My father's real name is Teo Kim Chang. My mother's real name is On Min Chai. I had no idea I was even Chinese until I was in my late 20s. My parents had to change who they were to be accepted and belong. And this pattern had repeated itself again and again in my own life. This is a picture of my mother's family on the left. My grandmother, with 7 children, finally left her alcoholic, abusive husband, my grandfather. But then she ended up also abandoning her 7 children when she got remarried and had another 4 children. My father, on the right, he's the bottom left, probably about, 3 or 4 years old. His father committed suicide in Bandung, Western Java. During the Japanese occupation, he witnessed an atrocity by the Japanese soldiers, and they found his sandals outside a well that he apparently had jumped into. This is Chinese New Year in Bali, hosted in my great-grandparents' old theater. They owned the first 2 movie theaters in Denpasar back in the early to late 40s. My maternal grandfather, on the top left picture there, and his tombstone that I visited unknowingly while I was at a funeral, he was murdered on December 13th, 1945. He was murdered during the Japanese occupation when he was trying to protect his own family. My grandmother was the eldest of his children. She was 14. And at risk of being taken as a comfort slave to the Japanese soldiers, he gave them food, he gave them water, he might have given them money, but he befriended them. His neighbors named him a spy. So when the Japanese soldiers had finally left, the Balinese took him and his brothers and his cousins out of their homes and cut them down and massacred them in a nearby rice field. So my grandmother had to raise her 7 children at the time on her own with the shame of being called a spy. But what if the Balinese neighbors looked at him as another human instead of a spy, out of a lens of love and empathy and compassion, understanding that he was also scared for his life and was trying to survive? Would they have named him an enemy and killed him down if they weren't also scared themselves? I know that's really heavy, so I'm bringing up Disney. On a lighter note, Disney really understands intergenerational trauma. I now watch every movie with a new lens. Each of these films has a trauma story being passed down through the family to the child. 2 of them, Encanto and Coco, involve a history of capital T trauma. a murder, a death, and all of them involve small t trauma. So let's look at how that happens. In attachment theory, children are hardwired by nature to seek attachment to our caregivers for survival. Attachment-seeking coping mechanisms that we develop in childhood become the template we use into adulthood long after the need for survival dependence. So how does trauma show up in children whose emotional needs aren't met? Dr. Mate's explanation of how we lose ourselves in childhood makes me question who I am today. What is authenticity and how do we lose it? Authenticity is a core need to be true to oneself and the capacity to shape your life based on knowing yourself, knowing your gut feelings when they arise and honoring them. If we had to choose between attachment or being authentic, at a young age, we will always choose attachment because our life depended on it. So children learn to suppress their emotions, their voices, and their authentic selves for the approval and love of their parents. I see that this is what I did. And ironically, it's not dissimilar to how my parents had to lose their Chinese identities to be approved by their society and the country. This happens day in, day out. Doesn't matter what age. So what is personality? Much of what we list or call personality is not a fixed set of traits, but they're actually only coping mechanisms a person requires in childhood. If I ask my friends to list my traits, my good friend Michelle is back here. Maybe you can agree with these or not, but I'd be reliable, hardworking, productive, goal-oriented, motivated, takes initiative, organized, adventurous, fun-loving. I'm looking at you, Jack. You're my ex-boss. Once at a performance review called me, you're like a pit bull. If I gave you something to do and a goal, you would like attack it. And I always remember that. I was like, oh, is that a compliment or not? These traits can be seen as positive and socially acceptable, but now I understand that my chaotic and unstable home environment caused so much fear, so much anxiety in me as a child that these traits formed as modes of survival. I thought there was something wrong with me for my own mother not to love me. That was my belief. So believing that I wasn't enough, I changed to be as perfect as possible, to meet all social expectations that I thought were necessary to be loved, to be accepted, to belong. So this is how the need for external validation is born in a child. If this was one of my attachment-seeking coping mechanisms that I developed in childhood, what am I now doing as an adult? I no longer need the survival dependence. So this is the part I understood that had to die to get to the conscious part, that I had to release this coping mechanism. The greatest gift to your kids is to be self-aware, I was told by Dr. Shafali. I've done so many of her courses, met her in person. But now I realize that Max, my son, gave me the greatest gift, my own need for self-awareness. When we are self-aware, we take ownership for who we are and how we show up. We take accountability for how our energy impacts others. We begin to change our style to fit what our kids need from us, instead of trying to mold our kids to fit what we need. We begin to change, we take greater care of ourselves. We begin to heal our past and our emotional baggage. We enter the present moment and get in touch with what's happening in the here and now. And we change patterns as they're occurring right here and now. In this past year, as I see my self-awareness growing moment to moment, I watch my reactions as if in slow motion from an out-of-body experience. I can dismantle a moment much faster now. Maybe it was an hour, this time it was half an hour. Before, it would be days to a week of me sitting in shame and guilt, feeling helpless and completely stuck in my past story. So now I look at myself through 3 different perspectives: my ego, my inner child, and my conscious adult self. If egos were created to protect us, they're the armor that defends against pain. It's an identity that we acquired as children that's separate from the authentic identity of our true selves. So if my personality is seen from the outside world by my friends and my more colleagues as actually my ego, then I'm always showing up armored up. I'm armored up in work. I'm armored up even with friends or making new friends. If you're in a place where there's fear, anxiety, and stress, and you don't want someone to know who your authentic person is because it might not be acceptable, then we armor up. So if I need to be perfect and competent at work, how was I showing up to work? And how was I truly connecting with the patients where trauma-informed care was so important? This is a very oversimplified slide. I probably spent hours and hours of diagnosing my egoic armor with one of Dr. Chevalier's live webinar courses that I asked for Christmas. And I've watched it 4 times over. It was a 3-day, 15-hour course, which I've watched over and over and shared with friends. But this is a description that Dr. Chevalier has simplified psychological archetypes into 5 parenting styles. There are the fighters, who are control freaks, who want to control everything through aggression or yelling or slamming doors, or just they can't regulate their own emotions and stress. There are the fixers, the worrywarts, who are in high anxiety, need to control all the different things that are happening to feel like they're in a safe place. There's freezers, who disengage when there's something that's uncomfortable or stressful. They'd rather turn towards perhaps alcohol or drugs or work or a screen to remove themselves from the stressful situation, but they're physically still there. There's fawners, like the stage mom or the sports dad, that just look good at any cost, no matter how stressful, just look good and seek attention by looking good. And then there's the fleers, who just outright abandon. They just outwardly leave, divorce, send their kids to their grandparents or to a boarding school. They're just physically not there and emotionally not there. These defensive coping mechanisms of the ego apply to every human interaction and are activated under fear, anxiety, and stress. So Mark and I, well, I don't know if you want to guess what I am. I'm a superhero fixer. I'll be overly productive, overly competent, just all the time doing. And the addiction to my doing, to solving every problem, whether in reality or whether in my mind, was actually what undermined my own connection to myself and to my family. I was always constantly doing, and it was exhausting. It led to burnout, and I never actually sat in stillness with understanding what it was I was anxious about. If at a higher level of stress, I turn into a fighter. I turn into a yeller. I'm slamming doors because I can't handle the stress. Mark, if I may, is a freezer. In uncomfortable situations or emotional situations, he'll turn to work. So when I was trying to fix all the solutions and look up all these things, he was working, and that work gave him comfort and validation, and it was a safe place. That was his safe place. And then when push comes to shove, he also turns into a fighter. My son is also a freezer fighter. So when he disengages, he just reads his book, he looks at a screen, he doesn't want to talk about what happened at school, but when he gets pushed into the corner, he will also fight. So if you can imagine the 3 of us all fighting, this was the chaos that happened the year before we left for Bali. So what is a healthy ego? What am I striving for? Because an ego is a neutral, natural thing. It's secure in its identity. It's positive about its place and role in the world. It's able to handle conflict without excessive aggression while still maintaining boundaries. It keeps things in perspective. It doesn't obsess or catastrophize or aggrandize. It can process disappointment and failure without loss of self-esteem. It's able to respect and interact harmoniously with others and the world around it, and capable of self-reflection and receiving and processing feedback. So what is an unhealthy ego? I had lost the ability to adapt to challenging situations as a parent in the present moment. I was using coping mechanisms from my past that no longer applied as an adult. An unbalanced ego becomes obsolete and no longer serves a purpose to protect you. So make note if any of these applies to you, because it can cause a disconnect in our own relationships and with ourselves, because sometimes it will armor up when it really didn't need to. An unhealthy ego makes you feel chronically dissatisfied that nothing is enough. We see scarcity over abundance. We feel a disconnect within ourselves. We can't express or sit in our own difficult feelings. You don't know who your authentic being is. You feel disconnection in relationships with others. You easily get triggered and blame the other. You feel defensive, which holds you back from vulnerability and growth. You may be harshly self-critical with limiting beliefs, thus highly critical of others. You strive for perfection. Mistakes are not acceptable, so apologizing is hard. You're constantly looking for external validation of your self-worth, comparing yourself to others often. I know this list very well. It happens so fast when you armor up, you don't even know that your ego has launched to protect you. Bringing Tom from care home meant that I needed to see all the people in my family in a different lens. When I found out in February 2014 that my brother had friends who were now living in my family home using drugs with him, There was a stolen car in the driveway. I drove with our 9-month-old son from Ottawa to the house, ready to call the police because I was at wit's end. I did not know what to do. Mark luckily talked me down from the ledge and said he was not going to recover from criminal record. So I called the cleaner who had told me about this. I later found out that that cleaner had empathy for my brother because she too once was addicted to used heroin. So she went into this house, she cleared out his friends, she got rid of the stolen car, and then she called me at my neighbor's and said, leave the baby, come see your brother, he's ready to see you. When I knocked on that door, I didn't know what I was going to do. When he opened the door, I could see him for the very first time. I saw his fear, I saw his grief, I saw his isolation. 5 weeks before my mother died in the ICU at one hospital, and ironically, I was the person who was told to make the decision to extubate her. 2 weeks after that, my father with Alzheimer's was found almost frozen to death, looking for his wife. So he was in another hospital, not even knowing that his wife had died. My brother was alone and scared and grieving, and he was using crack cocaine at this point, and the only people he had with him were the friends who used. My fixer, superhero ego mode, sold the house, sold the car, got him into detox, and got him treatment in a week. All the while breastfeeding my baby. It was nuts. It was totally nuts. I was in the midst of a nervous breakdown. I was still hosting Christmas dinner with a smile because all of Mark's family was at our house. I had no idea. I was not processing any of the deaths, the mourning of my father's Alzheimer's, nothing. That was my superhero ego, fix everything for me. I was completely disconnected from myself. My child, when Max doesn't listen to me, doesn't give up his iPad, just says no, I was losing it. I had no emotional regulation because it was never modeled for me as a child. It created the very environment of stress, fear, and anxiety that I actually grew up in. And it escalated the same energy in Max, causing him to yell and hit. It worsened the disconnect in our own relationship. My husband, Mark. Every relationship encounters moments when we feel hurt by another person, and we react. We react by maybe blaming our partners for making us feel a certain way. I used to feel so hurt when Mark did not introduce me. He might be talking to someone anywhere, and I would stand beside him feeling invisible. I would get so angry and so hurt. The reality for him is he felt stupid. He didn't remember that person's name. The story I had in my head was, he doesn't validate me. He doesn't acknowledge me. I must not matter. I created a whole different story, and he had his own story. My parents. In grade 5, the night before photo day, my mother walked into the bathroom where I was showering and against my will cut off all my hair. I probably have the same haircut I did in grade 5 just to hold on to that. I looked like Gary Fleming, the boy beside me. I had been crying all night. I had swollen eyes. People asked, wow, what happened to your hair? I had to fake it. I had to suppress. I had to pretend it was normal. When I screamed and yelled and cried, my father did not come upstairs to stop her. I blamed my abusive mother for my horrible childhood. I blamed my father for never helping me when my mother was abusive. But now, in understanding their past and their trauma patterns, I now have empathy and compassion for their struggles. And they did the best they could with what they knew. So now I'm learning to understand my own behavior patterns and how to apply empathy and self-compassion to my own trauma story and why I get triggered. Emotional triggers that we all carry. Who's the one with the mechanism to deliver the ammunition? Who's the one with the ammunition inside them? And where do you want to put your attention? Do you want to put your attention on the trigger purely? Or are you curious about what ammunition, what explosive material you're carrying inside? If you're triggered, we need to own 100% of our own inner experiences. Now I understand that I have an inner child with past trauma and unmet emotional needs. This inner child is codependent on my ego, my fighter, my fixer that reacts in fear and anxiety. I now am practicing to be that conscious adult that's present in that moment, that's not time traveling to my childhood, that is responsive to my son, responsive to my husband, And the thing that had to die was my ego, and that I need to talk and reparent my own inner child. This was a huge epiphany that I had my own triggers and Mark has his own triggers. So this is a huge list of triggers from the Gottman Institute. You could feel excluded, powerless, unheard, scolded, judged, blamed, disrespected. Maybe I felt uncared for, lonely, or ignored. It goes on. My personal ones from my childhood are I felt powerless when my mother overtook me. I felt uncared for when my father didn't come up the stairs. I felt unsafe and I felt unloved. And every story forward, I project this onto what happens. So what's important for emotional self-regulation and emotional intelligence is understanding the difference between emotions and feelings. Emotions result from external stimuli and are sensations caused by the release of chemicals from the brain. They are brief and they are intense. They are reactions that may result in changes in blood pressure, pulse rate, facial microexpressions, body language, brain activity. Feelings, however, are our own thoughts about the emotions that we experience, and they can actually sometimes be distorted and inaccurate. They are physical or emotional, and they're associated with your memories, events, beliefs, temperaments, and they're specific to an individual. That was a huge epiphany, because if we believe all our thoughts and feelings, we actually can create our own pain and suffering. I have an example of this. Mark's birthday dinner in September of 2014. Everyone had left. I put my one-year-old son, our one-year-old son, to bed, and Mark sat on the couch watching 80s music videos with his two children and their partners. I, on the other hand, was cleaning up the kitchen, literally like 5 meters away in the same open room. Thankfully, Irma was there. Hi, Irma, if you're online. She helped me clean the whole place, and we were scrubbing and cleaning because I created a story in my head. I had a fear that this has to be cleaned tonight. I can't go to sleep without this being clean. I'm going to do it because I can't wake up early tomorrow. The baby's going to get. So this whole expectation that this had to be cleaned was self-induced. It created anxiety in me. As I looked over to the couch, I saw them laughing and watching videos, and I was furious. I became angry. I created a story that this was white privilege. You know, like what did his ex do? How are they not noticing me? Like I'm over here, like I created a whole story that I projected on a room full of people. I was so upset that when Irma left and the work was done, I walked by them and I said, I can't believe not one person looked up and even acknowledged or offered help. And I stormed upstairs crying. Mark eventually came upstairs. He's like, sorry, everyone feels guilty now, like, because I projected that onto them. Today, just 9 years later, I processed that and realized, wow, I could have looked at, instead of a lens of fear, but a lens of love. That if I was connected to my own self and knew my own worth, well, many different things could have happened. I could have left the mess, not attach anxiety and this story of fear and it had to be done, this expectation that no one was pushing except for me. I could have joined them. I could have sat on that couch and laughed and had the happy family moment that I actually wanted in the first place. But my ego came in. My ego had to fix the mess. Then my ego became the fighter and got all angry at them. But if I was connected and knowing my self-worth, I could have said, hey, I'm going to join you, and felt a sense of love and belonging. Or I could have asked for help. I could have actually connected to them without the anger, without the anxiety, without the fixing. This emotional self-regulation is so challenging. It's a moment-to-moment thing. But now I look back at that time and I was like, wow, I can apply this to all the arguments I've had and to all the human interactions I have from this moment forward. So all true connection emerges from one place only, our connection to ourselves. You can change kids not through control and fear, but through connection. So how do we connect within so that we can see and hear and love ourselves, so that we're not looking for external validation for other people to prove our worth? As the Buddha said, we need to release the ego, to break the patterns of armor from childhood, to find our authentic selves deep, deep inside and peel away those layers. We need to release our own expectations and desires imposed by society, by culture, by family. We don't need to believe everything we think. Connection with ourselves can lead to true connection with others and beyond, into our natural world even. I did a workshop with New World Together founder on how trauma-informed practice can actually address our global sustainability issues. That in prehistoric reality, as cave people, there was a fear of scarcity. We would die if we had no food and water. There was a real fear of hostility if a saber-toothed tiger was outside the cave. And there was a real fear of separation if you were kicked out from the clan and was by yourself in the outside world. Those are real human collective traumas. But now in our present modern world, we now have unsustainable behaviors actually attached to those same fears. That the fear of scarcity could mean I don't have enough material wealth. I don't have enough money. I don't have a big enough house. And that fear of scarcity is looking out at the world instead of, looking at abundance that, yes, I have enough. We don't have to buy more. We don't need to overconsume. We don't need as much capitalism, which has led to pollution and resource depletion. Through a lens of hostility, we look at each other as enemies. What if my great-grandfather had been murdered? If they realized that they were the same humans, scared of the same enemy? A lens of hostility in the world has led to people and countries looking at each other, building fences and buying guns to defend themselves, leading to global accumulation of weapons of mass destruction, just in case. What if we had a mind shift towards sustainability of trust, that we actually don't need to defend ourselves? With the fear of separation today, we have blind social conformity. We have children all dressing and looking like each other. We all have to go to university. We have religious institutions. We don't want to be left out. We don't want to be excluded. And in this conformity, we lose our individuality and our authentic selves to follow these expectations, to feel belonging. But ironically, there's technology and social media that has created so much divisiveness that it will continue to isolate humans from each other. So in Bali, what has Mark and I been doing? We've been doing trauma-informed self-care. We've been doing breath work, yoga, meditation, family constellations, therapy, sharing groups, a writer's club, doing music and dance. That is Mark on the left with his yoga and meditation teacher. This is a picture at the top right of, I had 23 friends. Michelle was there with their husbands and their kids, showed up in Bali on June 26th, and I introduced them to breathwork, which is very profound. I can't explain it now. I know I'm going to be over time. I started writing a memoir. I joined a drumming group. I thought I had no musical talent. That's a self-limiting belief. But then I found out the 26-year veteran percussionist from the Madrid Symphony Orchestra is teaching drum lessons. So hell yeah, I'm going to do that. And it was amazing. It was therapeutic. And I believed myself to not be able to do any musical things. Mark and I did a talk at the Bridge, the Green School for Parents, on sharing what trauma-informed care meant for us. I started a group after that talk that I did not actually advertise. And this trauma-informed parenting group now has almost 100 people because everyone's desperate to not feel alone in their struggles. I hold parenting circles. I've held Parenting for Humans workshops. This 3-day workshop series I held twice. It's Rainbows from Darkness, Chasing Perfect Parenting from an Imperfect Childhood. Another day was on our crowded minds, all the belief systems that can cause us suffering and how to release them, and how staying human means to turn fears into love. On the top left is the Green School's Green Camp, where I held workshops. On the right is a workshop on global sustainability issues and human solutions using trauma-informed care. And on the bottom is our parent circles that I hold every week. This is now our happy family photo-worthy life moments. But Max one day said, "Hey mom, do you remember how often we used to fight last year?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." Because it's only happened once in like 3 or 4 months. I'm like, you are right. We had changed something. I knew exactly when that meltdown happened. I knew how we had to repair it. I knew that we had grown. And today we are more connected as a family, but still have our moment-to-moment struggles and challenges because we are continually trying to break those lifelong trauma cycles. So this is our new Eco Village villa that we bought on the top left. It's 2 years old. It's made out of mud, just like the Kenyan homes, to regulate heat. We lived there for 4 days before coming here. It was already leaking from the rain. But it only cost $1,000 to fix it. That is the Green School gymnasium that Max is swinging on the swing there. Everything's made out of bamboo at the Green School. That is this grade 4 classroom There's a grade 4 class at the bottom of, I don't know, 17 to 18 kids, and then a second grade 4 class at the top. Also totally made of bamboo in the jungle next to the river. And the bottom right view is of Gunung Agung, which is Mount Agung. It's the biggest volcano on the island. And that was our sunrise view from our open living room for the last 11 months before we moved. Well, so looking at that, we're not coming back for now. Mark and I are letting go of our identities, dismantling our egos that really depended on our careers. And now we're recreating ourselves while we're there in Bali for the present moment. And people are just like, are you going to be there forever? I'm like, no, there's no forever, but this is like a year to year going with the flow project. So thank you so much for holding this safe space for me to share.
I don't think we have any online questions, but does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Arleen, thank you. That was fantastic.
Any questions that you have, please project towards the microphones.
I have a question for Jack. So what did pitbull actually mean? Do you even remember saying it?
No.
Exactly, see? My ego held on to that. No, I'm very grateful for having all these years of working here with amazing people, friends that shaped my life journey to where it is now. And as you know, I've always left, but I've always come back because I knew I belonged here and I was always welcomed back. So I do appreciate and I'm grateful for that. But I'm hoping that maybe this is the last time I keep coming back and that you come visit us in Bali. So, and certainly Mark and I would be happy to welcome. I think Chase is the next one coming up. He's coming to visit in 3 weeks. So you can let me know if you want to do any trauma-informed self-care. Because Bali brings up things that we did not know were showing up there for. We had no intention of doing all this self-inner work. We thought we were going for our son. But there's just a saying that that's what Bali does to people. Just opportunities come up that happen to be at the right time at the right moment that you didn't know you needed. So that's what we're trying to embrace, just going with the flow. So thank you. I know it's 1 and people have to go back to work. So
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.